So here is the question he's posing is, do we see reality as it is? And as you can see, there's a tomato and a tomato in the bubble, and we're gonna listen. So just jump in and let me know if you want me to stop it in key places. Okay, here we go.
I have an experience that I describe as a red tomato a meter away. As a result, I come to believe that in reality, there's a red tomato a meter away.
Is that what's happening?
I mean, it's weird to describe the experience as a red tomato a meter away. You have an experience, and as a result of that experience, you conclude that there's a red tomato a meter away, and you say there's a red tomato a meter away. Seems to me perfectly plausible. Happens to me when I'm a meter away from a red tomato. But I wouldn't say you see the tomato and you describe it as a tomato a meter away, and you're right or wrong about that. And then if you have to describe that experience, you'd say, Yaron, I was having this experience like the kind you have when there's a red tomato a meter away, but then it turned out, there wasn't one, it was an illusion. That's how I would describe what's going on here. And I think that difference matters, but let's see where he goes with this.
But that's curious, because I would never think of it that way. So, because you don't actually think of yourself as, I'm having an experience as if there's a bookshelf behind Greg. I just say there's a bookshelf behind Greg.
Yeah, and you don't describe your experience. You describe the world that you see, and then you only kind of retreat to or back up to describing the experience if you have a reason to think that something's gone wrong, or if there's some other unusual context, like it was such an experience seeing this bookshelf, it overwhelmed me or whatever. But not if, it's just red tomatoes a meter away. That's not so much of an experience. It's not the kind of thing Hendrix was on about or whatever.
Yes, and I think Greg does not have a green screen, and that's actually a bookshelf behind him. But
yeah, that's true. Although Harry, our friend Harry Binswanger, has a projection, but it's his house. He just projects his own, I guess he doesn't want to clean the room, so he projects the room that's actually behind him. That's right. And that is freaky because he occasionally just disappears when he moves too far from the camera. I just point the camera and you can see, because it's messy, that it's.
So I'm going to have a green screen soon. I think we'll see if it works, but so that I can have different backgrounds for different things that I do. I do too many things and I keep moving sculptures and moving books and putting them up and putting them down, and I think it'll be more professional if I have different backgrounds for different events. All right, so back to the experiencing of a red tomato a meter away.
I then close my eyes, and my experience changes to a gray field. But is it still the case that in reality there's a red tomato a meter away? I think so. But could I be wrong? Could I be misinterpreting the nature of my perceptions?
Let's pause it here. And what does he mean when he says, I think so, but could I be wrong? He's the guy who's got this whole theory about how this isn't really true. So in some sense, he doesn't think so. So what is he saying when he says, I think so? He's like taking this dual perspective on himself. I'm tricked. I believe there's a tomato there. But at the same level, I believe that what I believe is wrong. There's something a little bit pseudo-profound about this if you think about the kind of structure of it. And what do you mean by reality there anyway, if you think it's not really real, but then anyway, we'll see where he goes with this. But
yeah, I think it's a kind of a presentation trick, because he's trying to get the audience to think, well, do you know that there's a tomato there? He's trying to get the audience to think, when you close your eyes, does the tomato still exist there, or did your mind create it? So he's getting them in that mood.
Everyone knows where he's going, right?
What's that?
I mean,
yeah,
everyone knows where he's going,
yes.
Right? It's I don't know, the kind of acting strikes me as a little heavy-handed, but let's see.
But you see that a lot in TED Talks, because they're trying to lead you along in some way,
and
they're
seems
trying to be
work.
original, but
neither of us has 1 million views on anything.
That's true.
So maybe we should.
True. We're just jealous.
Yes,
1.2 million views, guys.
We have misinterpreted our perceptions before. We used to think the Earth is flat because it looks that way. Pythagoras discovered that we were wrong. Then we thought that the Earth is the unmoving center of the universe, again because it looks that way. Copernicus and Galileo discovered, again, that we were wrong.
What does it mean to say that the Earth looks like the unmoving center of the universe?
That from the perspective of standing on Earth, everything appears to be going around us.
Yeah, but I mean, if a, like a baby looks up, or a cave person looks up, or a person even in ancient Greece looks up, does it look like there's a whole universe spinning around him? I mean, it looks like there are stars and some of them move and it's a little bit confusing. That's a complex theory that was formed. It's not, it just looks like it. And even the Earth is flat. I mean, I don't think my son, who's like a toddler, has an opinion on whether the Earth is flat. It looks that way to him. I don't think it would have occurred to him one way or the other what shape it is. And I don't think it would occur to most people before the question is raised in a kind of pretty sophisticated context. What's the shape of the whole world? The ground here is flat. And then it is flat to a certain range of precision. More on range of precision as we go.
Yes.
Galileo then wondered if we might be misinterpreting our experiences in other ways. He wrote, "I think that tastes, odors, colors, and so on reside in consciousness. Hence, if the living creature were removed, all these qualities would be annihilated."
That strikes me as interesting.
Yeah, I think that view was around before Galileo. A kind of interesting method that's often used to argue for idealism, which is basically what's happening here in this video, is you start with things like pain. And you say, like, you feel the fire and you think the heat is really in the fire, but the pain really isn't in the fire. And yet the pain, it's not like it's the same thing as the heat as you feel it. And that argument is in Bishop Berkeley, who's quite a bit later than Galileo. But I think there are versions of things like that in the ancient skeptics as well. We can talk more about that kind of issue later. I don't think that's essential to the argument that's going on here, though. So let's.
Yeah, it's interesting that he brings up Galileo here. Again, I think this is more to confuse the audience more than anything else.
Well, part of the reason Galileo's coming up is this is kind of like a warmed over cheap version of Kant. And Kant makes his whole thing about the Copernican revolution, right? What he's doing by saying that the world must conform to the mind, not the other way around, is like Copernicus saying the Earth goes around the sun, not the reverse. And so we get the cosmological or like solar system example, and then we get Galileo, somebody who was a supporter of the Copernican theory, and then we're getting Galileo as a kind of wedge into this kind of Kantian idealist Copernicanism. I'm guessing that's why Galileo's a convenient person to hang your hat on here.
So in what sense is the statement by Galileo wrong?
Well, so should back up to what is the statement? He's talking about, I would expect the statement is about what the early moderns called secondary qualities. It was like the heat, what can we go back a few seconds?
Tastes, odors, colors, and so on reside in consciousness. Hence, if the living creature were removed, all these qualities would be annihilated. So
Galileo is at a time when this kind of view corpuscularianism is coming to the fore. And there's the idea that there are little bodies, everything's made of them, atoms basically. And they have certain of the features that the things we think we experience do. They have size and shape and stuff like that, the ones physics would study, but not other ones. Color, smell, taste, etc. And so you get this distinction between primary and secondary qualities. It maps onto an earlier distinction Aristotle drew between common and proper sensibles. Anyway, then the idea you get in people like many of the early moderns is that the primary qualities, shape, size, etc., are real and exist outside the mind, but the proper sense or the secondary qualities, color, smell, etc., only exist inside the mind. And what Hoffman is going to say is, no, I think even the primary qualities don't exist outside the mind. So he's going to do this tradition one better, as it's been done one better time and time again by Berkeley and so forth. And you can see why you would do it. If heat and pain exist inside the mind, but then motion and heat turn out to be the same thing, and you could see why, you can see why there's a kind of slippery slope here. Yep. What's wrong with it? Well, I think what's wrong with what Galileo's saying and what's wrong with what Hoffman's saying are somewhat different. I think it's right that there's a mistake to separate out the primary and secondary qualities as much as this early modern corpuscularian tradition did. It's right to separate them out for the perspective of what does physics study, but it's wrong to assume that the primary qualities have some special reality status that the secondary ones don't. And in a way, that's the same point that Hoffman's going to make, but in favor of them both being unreal. I'll say a bit about what I think is real later on, but I think whenever anything you know is real, you still know it in a way. There's still a way you know it, and there's a kind of confusion that takes place in a lot of talk about perception between the way you know it is part of you, therefore what you know is part of you. And I think that's the case with both primary and secondary qualities, both things like shape and size and so forth on the one hand, and things like odor and color on the other.
Good.
Now that's a stunning claim. Could Galileo be right? Could we really be misinterpreting our experiences that badly? What does modern science have to say about this? Well, neuroscientists tell us that about 1/3 of the brain's cortex is engaged in vision. When you simply open your eyes and look about this room, billions of neurons and trillions of synapses are engaged. Now this is a bit surprising because to the extent that we think about vision at all, we think of it as like a camera that just takes a picture of objective reality as it is. Now there is a part of vision that's like a camera. The eye has a lens that focuses an image on the back of the eye where there are 130 million photoreceptors. So the eye is like a 130 megapixel camera. But that doesn't explain the billions of neurons and trillions of synapses that are engaged in vision. What are these neurons up to? Well, neuroscientists tell us that they're creating in real time all the shapes, objects, colors, and motions that we see. It feels like we're just taking a snapshot of this room the way it is, but in fact, we're constructing everything that we see. We don't construct the whole world at once. We construct what we need in the moment. Now, there are many demonstrations that are quite
here. So what's just happened in this video? We were told that there's a whole lot of stuff going on in our brain. We were given numbers of neurons and this receptor and that receptor. So we're supposed to be very impressed by how much our brain is doing, which is impressive. Our brain does a lot. Yeah. And then that's supposed to surprise or worry us, right? Because you'd think you just see. There's nothing involved in seeing. You just see.
He was comparing it to the camera, right? And the camera
right.
It opens a shutter and it records exactly what it's seeing out there. It's simply, it's
now
relatively easy.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
And so maybe we're not really seeing what we think we just see because all this stuff is going on. It's like tampering. What's it doing? It's constructing, so he says, the neuroscientists say, all these things for us. But I mean, if you stand up and you're just standing somewhere, there's a whole lot of stuff going on, right? There's all these things firing and muscles tensing and all this kind of activity in your brain and your muscles and your nerves just to keep you standing in one place, just to keep your balance, right? And you think you just keep your balance, but there's all this activity going on. That's impressive and it's a cool thing to know, but it doesn't make you think, maybe I'm not really standing where I am. I'm constructing my posture, so therefore I'm not really standing this way. But notice what's being constructed in his view. What's being constructed is what we see. But why think that? If there's a whole lot of work going on for me to stand someplace, right? And there is a lot of work biologically going on just for me to stand here or sit here as I am. We think that work is going into creating the standing, into sustaining the standing. There's something I'm doing standing, and all this biological activity is making that standing happen. We don't think it makes the room that I'm standing in. We don't think it's building the house that I'm standing in, just because there's a whole lot of activity going on. Why think that all the activity going on in your brain and your neurons is constructing the objects? There's seeing, being aware of the world is a kind of activity. It's something you do. And it shouldn't be a big surprise to us that there's a lot of work involved in doing it, in detecting things, in discriminating them from one another, in figuring out their edges, in figuring out what things are part of one bigger thing versus two things next to each other. Clearly, there's a whole lot of work involved in that. And people who work on computers, trying to get computers to do some approximation of this, see how much work's involved in making that happen. Edge detection and all this kind of stuff. Clearly a lot of work, but why think that that's creating what you're aware of? Where does that premise come from? It's not from just noticing there are a lot of work. Again, I digest food. I eat it, I swallow it, it goes down. There's all this, there's gut bacteria we're learning more about, and the stomach churn. All this stuff is happening in me. Does that mean that I'm not digesting that food, that food isn't what gets processed and becomes a part of me? It's something else that I've constructed that I'm eating rather than the bagel or whatever?
And the whole, I mean, by positioning our minds versus a camera's not aware of the picture it's taking. It's just taking a picture. So you'd expect it to be a far simpler mechanism. The reason why computers, robots need now to be able to differentiate edges is because they're taking another step. They're still not aware, but they're taking another step which requires them to know what's out there in reality, know is in quotes, in more detail, because now they have to act in reality. But our consciousness is consciously is aware of all this and ready to act within reality. It's surprising it's only a third of the brain.
The real premise behind all of this is that anytime there's an awareness, if there's something that you're aware of, it has to happen know-how, like magic. Yep. It just comes and you're aware of it. And so if there's any work that's being done by consciousness, it can't, or by our brain or by anything about us, it can't be the work to enable us to be aware of things. It can't be the work to be aware of it. It must be the work to make something else, which thing then we're aware of snap like that. The idea that to be awareness would have to be a kind of nothing, that the act of being aware of something can't have any identity in itself. And so any identity, any working, anything going on in our apparatus of cognition has to be creating some object we're aware of or distorting the objects we're actually aware of. And this is a premise, she's not the only one to point it out, but that Ayn Rand pointed out in the history of philosophy and particularly in Kant. And what we're seeing in Hoffman is a kind of mini recapitulation of some ideas in Kant, pretending that they're established by science rather than just, having been worked out by Kant years and years ago and being read into the science now. And we'll see, in particular with this specifically Kantian thing, how bogus his way of reading it into the science. He doesn't actually tell us anything in science that even seems to establish it, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. All right.
Compelling that we construct what we see. I'll just show you two. In this example, you see some red discs with bits cut out of them. But if I just rotate the discs a little bit, suddenly you see a 3D cube pop out of the screen. Now the screen, of course, is flat, so the three-dimensional cube that you're experiencing must be your construction. In this
even that's not true, right?
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way. Some things look like other things.
No, exactly.
Dots moving in one way look kind of like a cube. You don't really think it is a cube. Did anybody think, oh crap, a cube was flying out of my screen at me? You don't experience a cube. If there was actually a cube in front of you, there'd be all kinds of different cues. You wouldn't feel that way. But you can get much more realistic illusions than that.
Yep.
Even that dress that people couldn't tell if it was blue and black or white and gold was a more convincing illusion than that. But you can get illusions that are really surprising and make you think twice. But what they all are is cases where two things look a lot alike, yep, such that it's easy to mistake them from one another, and you can't tell them apart by looking at them. Just like if you had two twins and they looked a lot alike, and I could say, look, you're experiencing Bill, but he's not here, so it must be your construction, when really all there is Bob here. And the answer is Bob and Bill look a lot alike one another, and our ability to discriminate people doesn't discriminate well between Bob and Bill. It's not like there's something that's in between Bob and Bill, which is what you're really experiencing. You're really experiencing Bob when Bill's there. You can't tell Bob and Bill apart. You experience Bill and he seems a lot to you like Bob and you confuse him. and you look at a bunch of dots moving or whatever the thing is, and looks to you like a cube, because dots like that look a lot like a cube.
And of course, in order to create these illusions, you have to understand the rules of reality, of what something looks like, what a cube actually is, so that you can create something that looks like it.
Next example, you see glowing blue bars with pretty sharp edges moving across a field of dots. In fact, no dots move. All I'm doing from frame to frame is changing the colors of dots from blue to black or black to blue. But when I do this quickly, your visual system creates the glowing blue bars with the sharp edges and the motion. There are many more examples, but these are just two that you construct what you see.
You know, there are a lot simpler examples too, because it seems to me now as though I'm seeing Yaron's head moving back and forth, shaking, like something is moving in my visual field. But really what's happening is different pixels on my monitor are lighting up or changing color, some of them pinkish and some of them grayish, in a way that makes it look as though Yaron's head's moving back and forth. And that must be constructed in my mind. And my mind has Yaron here in the room with me, when really there are just dots. Yeah, we built a box that makes dots that look a lot like people in front of us so we could have entertainment. And some things look like other things. We've leveraged that ability to make televisions, and he's leveraged a much more primitive form of that ability to make this goofy illusion. And doesn't everybody know that that's what's happening? You don't think the TV tricks you, right? You don't think, I thought there was a guy in my room, and who would have thought? And my mind must have made him. You think, yeah, we have a screen that makes things look like other things. And that's good, because this way it's very entertaining. You can learn a lot that way. And then we say, I see Yaron on the TV, but we don't think, like Yaron standing on our television set or in it.
Yeah.
But neuroscientists go further. They say that we reconstruct reality. So when I have an experience that I describe as a red tomato, that experience is actually an accurate reconstruction of the properties of a real red tomato that would exist even if I weren't looking. Now, why would neuroscientists say that we don't just construct, we reconstruct? Well, the standard argument given is usually an evolutionary one. Those of our ancestors who saw more accurately had a competitive advantage compared to those who saw less accurately, and therefore they were more likely to pass on their genes.
Anything wrong with this evolutionary?
Well, it's a little bit of a weird way he's even phrasing the question. Why would they say we reconstruct? What is that why doing? Is it their evidence for thinking this, or how they got? People start by thinking there's a world and we see it. Then they start to notice some of the mechanisms involved in our seeing it. They assume there's a world out there for good reason, and we'll talk about that. But then they think about, well, how does this system work? The reason why neurologists, for the most part, think that there's a world out there which our brains are helping us to see, and they think of it as reconstructing, which I don't think is the right way to think of it, but nevertheless, is because they think there's a world out there, not because they think the theory of evolution is true. They think the theory of evolution is true because they already think there's a world out there. So what he's really asking is something like, how did it come to be, or what is the cause of our brains doing this reconstruction? And one, you can generalize to that, what is the cause that we have a consciousness that's able to put us in touch with reality? Well, evolution. There's a plausible theory about the cause of it. And let's see then where he goes with that. Yep. But that's actually
the offspring of those who saw more accurately. And so we can be confident that in the normal case, our perceptions are accurate.
Pause here. So
you see this.
Notice that we can be confident that. So what's actually happening is he's saying, how do we know that our consciousness is valid? How do we know that our consciousness can be in touch with reality? Well, there are different theories of how. And this way of talking about it kind of goes back to Descartes, who wonders if his consciousness is valid. And he tries to come up with all these skeptical scenarios, not because he wants to prove that it isn't, but he wants to get some way to prove that even in the worst case scenario, he could be sure that his consciousness could know something. And he imagined like an evil god deceiving him, but it couldn't trick him about certain things. And so that's how he gets off the ground. And there's this whole tradition of doing this. By the 90s, and it might be that Hoffman played a role in this debate back then. He did write some stuff back then. But by the 90s within philosophy, I mean, I hadn't heard of him when I was an undergraduate student, but I had heard these arguments a lot. There are people raising this question of why should we think that our cognitive apparatus is valid? Why should we think that our minds actually get us in touch with reality? How can we be sure that or confident that that's the case? And people by then generally believed in evolution. And so evolution was posed by some people as a theory of how it would come to be that our consciousness would get us in touch with reality. And if we know evolution's true, then we can be confident that our minds work well. That's kind of backwards, because if our minds didn't get us in touch with reality, how could we know evolution was true? But anyway, there were some people who then started to put pressure on that. And one was Paul and Patricia Churchland, who are kind of materialist philosophers. And they, said, well, evolution is really to get us, fed and have sex, basically. And reality will take the hindmost. And then most famously, Al Plantinga, who is a religious epistemologist and philosopher of religion, said, evolution kind of could sort of give you a reason to think it, but really, if your consciousness is evolved, it would not show you what's real. It would just show you what would help you reproduce. So if you want to think that the world is real and your consciousness is designed to get at it, the best bet is to think God made it that way. After all, God wouldn't lie to you and so forth. And so this is all stuff that's been in the air since the 70s, 80s. I came across it in the 90s. And maybe, again, I don't mean to say Hoffman's just taking from these other people. Maybe some of them were taking from him, but all kind of familiar ideas. But there's a real humdinger that comes up soon that I found particularly funny. So let's.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he presents it as if, this is new and it's coming out of science, whereas this is old and it came from philosophy.
Now the particular question of, is evolution a mechanism for making our minds accurate, only of course comes once we have evolution.
Sure.
But the idea that our biological systems are here to serve functions goes back to Plato and Aristotle. It was known to be true since Aristotle's time. And what Darwin did was explained at a deeper level how that comes to be. So the idea that, the perception serves some biological role isn't even new with evolution. It's just, more deeply explained.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it Objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on Earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I?
All right, before we go on, reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now. 30 likes, that should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it, but at least the people who are liking it, you know, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing. Whether you're looking at this, and you know, the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, you know, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share, and you can support the show at JeronBrookShow.com/support, or on Patreon, or Subscribestar, or Locals. And show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.